So, Sami, just before we get started, did you manage to try out any other platforms besides Zoom? Or in terms of workflow, how has your workflow changed
I mean,
since the pandemic?
I kind of really enjoy Zoom.
Okay.
This is what I realized over the last like few days. Easy, quick, and it's quite easy to adapt and share. But
Mm.
regarding the most of the platform, I'm more I would say more grateful is becoming Slack because
Ah,
it's
okay.
also so quick. And one of the situations that we had just recently, we had a meeting, in an internal meeting with the team, and then we had some problems with the internet connection around the city. So we decided to do it on Slack,
Mm.
meeting itself. So we decided put the headlines of the meeting and start using it as a thread. And then in the meantime, not it's not something that we used to for sure, but it was easy.
Yeah.
So we're using that a lot. And how's your organization so far? How's everything going with the integration with the Zoom, and then the becoming online more, and you know
The thing is, maybe I'll get a chance to talk about this more when we get started, but uh, we've still not adapted fully in terms of offerings because before the pandemic, we had lots of offline workshops lined up, but then we've not made a switch to digital just yet. So this is something that we're currently working on.
Mhm.
Um, but what I've noticed is that a lot of organizations are just trying to replicate what happens offline online. So the sessions, the educational sessions are live sessions when I feel like some of them can be recorded, like give some content as recorded and the flexibility for people to go through that content whenever they want.
Yep.
And then live sessions are where people get the opportunity to ask questions, have discussions, and so on. But again, we've not made the full transition.
I mean, I think it's something that we learn in the way, right? I mean, I don't think like even if how tech savvy entrepreneurship ecosystem related you are, it's something that we knew. We're not really accustomed to do so.
Yes,
Like
yes.
because one of the things that I've been thinking about, maybe we will get the chance to discuss about this as well. The Zoom is great. We are we're going to talk about this in depth as well with the Agri-Food Connect program. But one of the things I'm quite, interested to definitely, think about it more is that, the aspect of networking, like how do you create that online? Because it's so quick, like it's like you go to let's say you go to an event and then you see the person that you wanted to meet and you can just, grab that person. But
Yeah.
online, there's this, intermediate sort of like a tool, but how do you create that instant spark online? That's the question on my mind for the last 2-3 weeks.
Yeah,
What is-
so I think within a platform like Zoom,
yeah,
uh, it's challenging because when you have a lot of attendees, it's hard to manage. But
yeah.
they also have this breakout rooms, so
Mhm.
the opportunity to segment attendees into smaller groups where maybe networking can be easier to sort of support. But the other thing, I feel like because we're actually recording from home,
Mhm.
it gives you a better glimpse of the person as a person, not within a business setting. So the informality, I think, does encourage stronger connections, like seeing the background of a person's house,
Hey,
it gives you a
yeah.
better sense of who they are. Yeah,
And your book, yeah, your library. I 100% agree on that. Like people are getting more comfortable with communicating as well. I think it's because one of the reasons I always think is just like because we are wearing more comfortable clothes all the time and more spending time in our home, so we're getting more used to being not like wearing the armor and going out to
yeah,
battle
yeah.
feeling rather than just like enjoying ourselves. So I think that's one of the silver linings of this situation. I don't know how long this is gonna last, but I think I'm gonna remember it for sure.
Yeah, like the first couple of weeks of the lockdown, especially like in Kuwait, because we had a curfew, uh,
Right.
my impression, I really felt like the world is having a huge pajama party.
Right.
Like everyone's at home,
That makes
they're in
sense.
pajamas. Yeah.
It
And
does.
like, no matter who you speak to, they're going through the same thing you're going through. So it was fun.
See, that's what I love. I think that's one of the facts that I'm really enjoying it, because whenever I feel, like bored or feeling like the plans are not happening, or any of this, sort of like a negative feeling, I realize like this is around the world. Like it's not just
Everyone's going for it, yeah.
exactly not you, not the neighborhood. It's literally the whole, world, and it's
Yeah.
also like interesting to experience that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, definitely. Um,
Great. So
so we have 8 attendees. If you want, we can go ahead.
yes, I think so.
Since we
Hi,
said it,
everyone.
and it's hey everyone, welcome. I'll start with. Oh yeah, more coming as well. Awesome. So I want to. I'll start with the talking about what is Kök Projekt. I have this small sort of like a presentation for newcomers and first time hearing about our organization. I would like to share some of the work that we are doing. And to do that, I'm going to share a presentation. So we are Kök Projekt, as I mentioned. So our organization, in short, is an agri-food startup accelerator that we work for the agriculture, food, and water, sectors. We develop entrepreneurship programs, corporate innovation programs, and what we do is that we work on empowering the agri-food entrepreneurship all around the globe. We believe the initiative of entrepreneurs will change the course of the future of food. So therefore, we take the action of empowering them through collaborations with companies, governmental organizations, NGOs, and ecosystem players as such, the Sirdab Lab. So we create these collaborations to support the agri-food entrepreneurs to help them reach their potential and beyond. So what we cover is literally the whole food value chain. We don't see it apart, we see it as a cluster. It's a cluster of connection. It's an ecosystem by its own, as the name goes. We cover it from the food production, from agriculture to even from water to agriculture to food production to retail consumption and all of that steps. So we cover all of these sectors and work with the entrepreneurs to help them, build, adjust, or scale their startups. And what is Agri-Food Connect? So that's the question of today. Agri-Food Connect, the program that we've been developed through the Food Ideathon, the network, which is the network that all across the MENA region we've been working on over the last 2.5 years. Finding amazing local partners as such, Sirdab Lab, and working on such programs to build and empower the entrepreneurship within the region. So the Agri-Food Connect program itself is a program that we see fit to the crisis that we are having all across the world. As I mentioned, we are focusing on food and agriculture sector. So we are working on developing platforms and also programs for entrepreneurs to build and apply their solutions directly within the company's value chain. So ideally, we want to create a virtual collaboration all across the world and build a global conversation on the agri-food sector and its future. So the program itself is about it has 4 sections. So we are kicking it off with webinars. It's a series of webinars. The idea of these webinars is to talk about what are the challenges, the opportunities, the trends within each country and each ecosystem that we are diving into, and understand how the startups actually develop better solutions and adapt to the new normal. The second step will be an online sprint. In this sprint, we will be focusing on bringing together companies and startups into same, quote unquote, rooms, where they can develop, new solutions, new products, new services, where they can work on their startups in the meantime. So the idea is to integrating their products and services directly to the company's value chain, because all of these companies have to adapt and come with new solutions to adapting to the new normal within the agri-food sector. The next step will be, we will be selecting top teams from these sprints, and we will be working with them on an agile mentorship program. What that means is that we will be focusing on their products, their team, their services, and also their portfolio, and we will be providing them mentorship while they are integrating their products and solutions directly to the company's value chain. And in the last step, we will be working with them and providing training to those startups on marketing and strategy, and also their growth strategy on a pre-acceleration program. So the whole Agri-Food Connect has the aim of helping, supporting, empowering the agri-food startups, agri-food sector to adapt to the new normal and to get ready for the future of food. So that's why we are kicking off, the first webinar in Kuwait. Thank you so much for your time, Haider, to joining us today, in collaboration with Sirdab Lab, because ideally, we are, even if we talking about, like different countries, different regions, the issues and the challenges we have is actually global. Because food is global, because the agriculture is global. So we wanted to talk about that and build a conversation around, and also help the startups to understand the ecosystem as well. So to find out more information about our organization and Kök Projekt, and also joining our Slack community, the #Kök community, you can just log into our website. It is kökprojekt.com, and you can log in to our Slack community and also register to our newsletter. So from this, introduction, I want to move in to our, today's webinar. As I mentioned, we are here today with Haider. Haider, thank you so much for your time again and joining us today. I would like to, pass the mic to you, where, if you can, talk about, yourself, your work, and also Sirdab Lab, please.
Okay, sure. So Sirdab Lab was started in 2014. I'm one of the co-founders, and I have two other co-founders. One is Muna Mkhazim, and it was actually her idea to start Sirdab Lab. What happened was, in 2014, there wasn't much of a startup ecosystem in Kuwait, and there wasn't a community or a place where people can connect. And if you're looking to build a startup, there's a lot. There are so many moving parts to building a startup that sometimes you may have, let's say, the idea or limited expertise within the space that you want to pursue, but you don't have the full set of skills that enable you to actually launch a startup. So you will be in need to find people who can join you in the team, or just expertise and guidance to support you in avoiding mistakes that people have already fallen into and learned from. So the goal, and when we actually started Sirdab Lab, there's a funny story. So we wanted to be as agile as possible in responding to what people need. So we didn't really know a lot of the struggles that people were struggling with, but we knew that we needed a community for the startup enthusiasts. So whether you want to be a founder, or maybe you're a developer, a designer who wants to be sort of involved in something exciting. So in the first days, we didn't know what we should be providing. We started with our first benchmark, or like the metric we had, was we wanted to host at least 3 events a week. So our only target was the volume of events, because we wanted more opportunities for people to connect. And the variety of events allows us to see, okay, what are people interested in? And we can strike conversations on like what people need, what they're struggling with, and so on. So we came up with something. Whenever somebody asks us a question about Sirdab Lab and we don't know like how to answer it, we'd say, oh, Hussein is handling this, I'll need to ask Hussein. Right. And there is no Hussein. So we just came up with a person, like a scapegoat, like just a way for us to avoid dealing or like answering difficult questions. And this is something I actually find exciting within the startup space. When you see the uncertainty as an opportunity, it's not because a lot of traditional businesses, they have this approach like, we need to be able to predict everything. We need to have projections, even if the projections mean nothing, even if they're guesswork. Business people want the reassurance to feel like we know what we're doing, and this is how the future looks. But with startups, you embrace the uncertainty. You say, I know there are so many things I don't. There are so many things I don't know, but how can I find out? What is the experiment that I can conduct? What is the conversation that I can have to be able to gain some certainty that I can then build on? But everything you consider a guess, a very intelligent guess, but it remains like a hunch that you validate with evidence. And one of the things I'm excited about when it comes to this webinar and what you're doing as a program is that I feel like it's not enough for people to just seek out motivation, because I know a lot of people attend events because they feel they're not motivated, which is valid. Like you do need to have, like you need to kind of keep that fire alive. But also when you seek out information, it needs to be connected to something that you will actually build, because learning is endless. You can learn so much. You can attend so many webinars, online courses, and so on. But you actually want to ground it into a real pursuit. So that's why I'm excited about the program that you're doing, because it brings people's attention to something that they can actually build. So Sirdab Lab, what we've been doing is we conduct workshops and training courses to help people in different aspects of business. But I would say our flagship product is a 3-week program, which is called a Startup Bootcamp. And the goal behind the bootcamp is we actually focus on something very specific within the startup journey, which is customer validation.
Right.
Because a lot of people, they get so excited and invested in their ideas that they assume that this is going to work because they feel good about it. But
right.
Your feelings are not really a good measure of business opportunity. You actually need to validate those opportunities. So what we focus on is for people to start thinking that whatever idea they have needs to be validated in some way. Okay. Right. Is it a survey? Is it an interview? Is it observation? Maybe you can observe people struggling with something specific. If you hear a lot of people complain about something, maybe it's on Twitter, maybe it's app reviews. You go to an app like delivery, let's say you go to Carriage, look at the reviews and what are people commenting on in terms of things they like. If people say, I love tracking, okay, you say, okay, I think tracking is an important feature to include in my app, in what I'm building. Or I hate XYZ.
Right.
So you can learn from other businesses and their experiences, and you can listen to what people are actually saying. But then again, like there are so many aspects of the business to validate. So maybe there is a valid or a genuine need, but people are not willing to pay for it. People feel like it should be for free. This doesn't mean that you can't build a business around it. It just means you need to find a creative way to come up with a business model. Maybe the customers are not the ones paying, maybe another sort of organization. So our focus has been on training programs. We also have a membership that includes mentorship hours, again, to make sure that people are always making progress and they have the enough clarity to make progress.
I see.
Because you can't develop complete certainty from the get-go. There are certain things you will discover along the way. But sometimes you just need a sense of accountability. You need to, sometimes it's reassurance. I've heard so many of our members, they say, we had this session with the mentor. It was great because it validated what we were already doing. That reassurance can be extremely powerful. If people have any sort of more specific questions, we can address those.
Absolutely. That's brilliant. I mean, I 100% agree. Like one of the great things, as you mentioned, is just like it's so easy to collect feedback now compared to even like 5 years ago. So it's so because we are, as the, quote unquote, the modern people are becoming more interested on giving feedback and having feedback, negative, positive. But in the meantime, it's so easy to collect them. I wanted to, ask you a question since we're on this subject, is that how do you see the ecosystem in Kuwait right now, compared to the times that you guys started and now, and how do you see the future now with the new normal? Like, how do you position, Kuwaiti ecosystem within the region as well? I would love to, hear your thoughts on that.
Okay, so I think there are three phases. One is when we started, and then just before the pandemic, and then after the pandemic.
Right, of course.
So when we started, the only other initiative within the startup space was something called Startup Q8, so Startup Kuwait, and the format of it was a monthly event where people can come and listen to. They get to see a presentation about a startup topic, and an interview with a startup founder. Right. But again, like at the time, there were people who were working on startups were working independently and in silos. Like there wasn't a community that's connecting people together. And I actually met Muna through Startup Kuwait. Like we were both organizers and we hadn't met.
Right.
So when we met, we started talking about Sirdab Lab, and the thing that we wanted was to provide a more comprehensive or holistic support for the entrepreneurial space.
Right.
Since then, there have been several co-working spaces. Actually, co-working was a small thing that we were also working on, having a space like where people can actually go to connect with others. So now there have been lots of co-working spaces, and I would say the catalyst for our ecosystem was the acquisition of Talabat. Talabat was the biggest acquisition in the region, or I think it compares to Maktub. When it got acquired by Yahoo, I can't remember when, but that was a Jordanian startup. This was like a new and big acquisition that got people interested in the startup space, including corporates, banks, investment firms, and so on. And actually, I remember it, like before that happened, the conversations we used to have is we need just one big story, one big success story that will bring the ecosystem together. And this is kind of what happened after Talabat. And then after Talabat, we had, so Talabat is food ordering. And then after Talabat, we had Carriage, which got acquired like within 10 months of launch for around $100 million. Right. So again, that's a huge sort of acquisition. And like these kind of success stories brought more attention, more programs to support entrepreneurs, but also more money in terms of investment. Because there were big exits, there was regional interest in Kuwait as well. So I would say like that kind of brought a lot of attention. And I think with Kuwait, the highlight would be entrepreneurial sort of spirit. There are a lot of founders building startups, but I think we have a lack in talent. So when it comes to development, we don't have high quality, affordable developers. That's something I feel we're lacking. But there's a startup in Kuwait called Coded, which is looking to actually increase the quality of developers in Kuwait, in the region as well. What else? Now, post-pandemic or like during pandemic, I honestly don't have a good sense of what's happening, and it's hard to predict how things will turn out. But what I'm seeing is that a lot of businesses are kind of pivoting to make sure that they remain operational and they remain afloat. Even like restaurants that used to, like just a restaurant, are now sort of providing what's it called, like the packaged sort of groceries where you take them and you prepare their dishes at home.
Meal kits, yeah.
Meal kits, exactly. So like those pivots are interesting, and I do think that there will be lots of innovations within each domain, maybe towards digitization of existing offerings or pursuing new offerings that they hadn't considered before.
Right. One of the underlying points that just caught my attention, based on what you were explaining, is that you talked about, two food delivery startups, Talabat and Carriage, that created the spark within the ecosystem. And when we looking into Kuwait, it's also the first food accelerator also based in Kuwait, which is the Saber Ventures, which is Mona, as you were mentioned, as the
yes. So my co-founder Mona is also managing partner in Saber Ventures. Yes.
Exactly. So it's also, it's easy to say, I would say, like Kuwait is quite, interesting market for, food startups to have, use cases to understand, and also even, develop products and services within this sector. Because, when you talk about like Talabat and Carriage, like comes up to my mind for Turkey as well. We had a company now, which was a startup. It was called the Yemek Sepeti, and it was acquired by Delivery Hero, and then it started the spark in the ecosystem regarding the food entrepreneurship and creating the conversation around it. So we can see that acquisition also as a starting point of change as well. So that's always interesting to see, the having food startup that much effect on an overall ecosystem. But when we take a look at the Kuwait, we're seeing actually two. One of the old reports that I was looking into is, it said there are actually 104, I think, startups that are focusing on food delivery around the MENA region, just on food delivery, which I believe it's a huge number. I mean, and this also includes, as you mentioned, the meal kits, e-groceries, prepared meal services or restaurant services that will deliver to your door. So all of these stuff has actually a massive interest and massive demand in the region. So I think that will also create, that other, services for these companies to adapt, because it also exists already, right? Because a lot of companies didn't actually have an online service, even the major food company ones that we're talking about. But now everybody's actually building and digitally transforming their value chain so that they can adapt to the new normal. But when we take a look to the ecosystem, there was already an existing interest.
Yes. Yes, definitely. But I'd also like to point out a couple of things. One is that Kuwait is well known for even food concepts when it comes to restaurants.
Right.
The restaurant that we went to, Cash and Little Bait, for example. Okay.
So,
yes. Yeah.
yeah.
We need a minute to appreciate it. But so in terms of food concepts, we actually have food tourism. Like people from around the region come to Kuwait just to try out different restaurants. And there was an initiative by a man called Rakan al-Fadala. He has a company called Contactless, and they provide like desserts, sort of special kinds of desserts. And he had an initiative to make Kuwait the food capital of the world.
Right.
So there are a lot of concepts, and like again, sort of Kuwait thrives within the food space, even beyond the startup scene. So that's one thing. The other thing, I think, like when I sort of mentor or guide the startup founders, especially those that are looking for ideas, like how to get started in the startup space, I tell them to look at human needs that aren't going to go anywhere. Like we have a human need for food. We have a human need for connection. We have a human need for entertainment. Like even looking at sort of primitive tribes, they do have music, they have dance, they have certain things to keep them entertained. So these are human needs that aren't going to go anywhere like for a long time.
Absolutely.
So food is something like that. You can trust that there will always be the demand for food. And what's interesting about food is that it extends, like you said, from the farm to the fork, or from farm to table.
Right.
Like you need food security on a basic level just to survive, but also you have a lot of innovations and different concepts for like food as a delicacy, as like just an experience. Even if all your needs are met, you still want to explore that sort of the pleasures that food can provide. So again, like you can't escape the need or the importance of food.
Absolutely, absolutely, 100% agree. That being said, I would love to dive in some of the the positives and negatives that bring to the food sector, as we as we see based on all of the research that we were doing. So
Yeah.
I wanted to just open up this slide. And in short, we are seeing, as we discussed, as you said, food is not going anywhere. Like that is definitely the case. And in positive side of it, we are seeing a lot of rise in the contactless delivery. So a lot of companies are becoming offering these contactless services, where they provide all of their products, groceries, meal kits, any of the stuff that you buy online within that sector is becoming contactless. So that is becoming a norm in the sector rather than a service that is being offered. The second one we see, which is quite interesting, is the process.
Sorry, just to cut you off. So, what's interesting about contactless is that sometimes it's not just a new kind of, and it's not a new service. It's a new way to conduct an existing service.
Exactly.
So instead of the driver interacting with you, he's just leaving the box by the door, and maybe nothing else has changed. It's only that form of communication at the very end, which is really interesting, like how granular innovation can be.
Exactly. It is definitely interesting, because it wasn't something that you would comes up to your mind that one day we would actually prefer not to see the person, and we would actually be able to select that option to have our order. Exactly, it's an innovation on a really smaller scale. Absolutely. Another one was processed foods, which I find it really interesting, because till a couple of months ago, the whole the vibe, the interest on food was actually heavily on natural, organic. Can we do it more lean, this and that, less pesticide, less this and less that. And then now in 2 months, we are seeing a huge surge in the demand of the processed foods. This comes with the idea of stocking, idea of buying in bulk, and then being able to keep and store this food for a long time, which also creates an opportunity for a lot of startups, because if you are a CPG startup, if you're a snack startup, let's say, you can come up with a more healthy version or alternative version, or even preparing more natural, longer shelf life for all of these processed foods. So it's a great section becoming within the sector as well. And then the last, food media, as you mentioned, because the entertainment is part of it. And now, cooking, baking, all of this has become our part of the, entertainment that we do at home, because we have time now. Do you see yourself more interested in cooking and preparing as well, or watching more shows, etc.? I know I personally have, but I was just curious about your how do you see yourself as the consumer or the customer of the food sector now, and how do you see the startups are positioning in this?
Okay, so confession time.
Yeah.
I've been watching MasterChef for many years.
Right.
But the only thing I'm able to cook is scrambled eggs, and badly, like,
which is tough. Not easy. I mean, it's a tough recipe. No, seriously. I mean,
okay, thank you.
There's like details.
But what's been happening, and what I really in love with, is that my children have become interested in preparing food. So every day, my son and my younger daughter, they actually fight over who's going to prepare desserts.
Right.
And also what's interesting is that my daughter is actually getting recipes from TikTok, like an iced latte or a cookie, these kinds of things. Like, the way to prepare food is now really accessible, and the way she's learning about it is really entertaining, that she feels excited to actually try out. So I consume what they create. I've not created anything.
TikTok is also a case by its own. If you have any opinions that you would like to share on that as well. I'm actually a firm believer of TikTok. I don't create content in there, but I consume a lot for sure.
Wow.
And I do try to do like surveys as a survey, you know, like quote unquote, like asking around with friends, do you guys use it? You know, in our team, you know, for example, my business partner used that a lot. And then, you know, she says minimum like an hour a day, just to, you know, clear head. And when I go to the universities, I also ask like, do you, you know, use TikTok? And a lot of people were like, no, we don't. It's just so lame and this and that, etc. But one of the greatest things I've seen, you know, throughout this crisis is that they also added a lot of content regarding the, you know, the COVID-19, how to, you know,
Yes.
you know, be protected by, how do you change your you know, daily lifestyle, what are the protection measures, etc. And I think it's just, you know, it's so brilliant to adapt on the social media as well, you know, not just as in, you know, as a service, but you change the whole perception of content within this platform. Even if you are the creators of it, it just changed the, you know, demand as well. So yeah.
Now I think TikTok, I need to wrap my head around it a bit more.
Sure.
But what I would say, I get really excited about platforms that make creation more accessible and more exciting. And I think with TikTok, what it's enabled, and before that even Vine, like the limit of 6 seconds, you have to come up with something, a creative scenario within 6 seconds. That constraint made people more creative.
Right.
And even like talking about the current situation, the lockdown, the constraints we're experiencing will produce the desire or the need for more innovation. There's even like this concept, like when looking at innovation, there is this sort of recommendation to think inside the box, which means to even come up with like artificial constraints just for you to start thinking more creatively. Because
Right.
when you don't have any constraints, like you don't develop the right focus to come up with something that's innovative. So yeah, like TikTok seems really promising, and there's a better understanding of how to keep people engaged and how to create content that excites your viewers.
Absolutely. And it's also different, right? I mean, it's more action focused and more, you know, quite short. As you mentioned, it comes from Vine as well, but it's also a platform by its own. I want to just take a moment and, you know, take some questions from the audience. I think you have one comment and one question. I wanted to read the Win's question. So thank you so much, Win, for asking a question. So what are the barriers for deep tech food startup in Kuwait? Why are there no cellular agriculture startups in Middle East? And is there any opportunity for startup to relocate to Kuwait if there are opportunity provided? What do you think?
Okay. Deep tech food startup. What I would say is that, as far as I know, in the MENA region in general, there isn't very strong support for research and development. That part is lacking, and I think there aren't sort of dedicated resources for this. And there's not a strong interest because people don't really understand these sort of advanced technologies. Some people like them as buzzwords, like AI and machine learning, these kinds of things, but they don't really know how to create these things. In Kuwait, we have an organization called KFAS, which is the Kuwait Foundation for the Advancement of Sciences. And their mandate is to encourage research development in STI, so science, technology, and innovation. But again, I'm not sure to what extent they have dedicated resources for the thing that you referenced, deep tech food startups. Again, no cellular agricultural startups. This requires research and development. I don't think there's been that interest in going too deep into these things. One thing I would mention about the situation in Kuwait, I do believe it's not that friendly to expats, I'm afraid to say. It's really hard to get a visa, and then just ongoing paperwork is a pain in the neck. We hosted startup programs in Kuwait where some of the attendees came from like countries in the region, and some of them had a really hard time getting their visas. one startup, for example, they were able to attend half the program, and then they went on a short break, and they weren't able to come back for the remainder of the program. So these challenges do exist, and I'm not going to hide the fact that they do. So as of yet, I wouldn't recommend relocating to Kuwait. Just if you're not Kuwaiti, it will be it will be unnecessarily difficult. You'll face certain challenges that you don't need to face. Your startup is challenging as it is. You don't need to deal with anything else. So that's my impression of the scene in Kuwait right now.
Right. And yeah, absolutely. So the second is a comment. So thank you so much for your comment, Amin. Please share your contacts. I'm based in Canada. There are several opportunities that we can collaborate on. Thanks. Of course, we will be sharing actually a survey that is also end of the webinar, and also our contact info you can find in that email as well. So we will be sharing that after our webinar as well. And also for our other attendees, if you have any other questions, you can just type in and shoot it in the Q&A section, and we will love to look into them as well. So if we move into the the negative.
Sorry, there's a question also within the chat from Serene. She says, do you collaborate with startups outside of Kuwait? So just to clarify, what Sirdab Lab does is we provide educational programs to support startups. We've only done, us personally, we've done only 2 investments and 1 advisory, I think, collaboration. We're kind of open to support startups even outside Kuwait, but we don't have a sort of formal offering for that. Most of our workshops are offline, and we're looking to transition towards providing digital programs, but again, I can't promise anything right now. Hopefully we'll announce these things soon.
And also there's a follow-up from Win. Thanks for the honest response and being so open about the current situation. Do you think there are any VC or funding from Kuwait companies investing in this technology? Is there anyone comes up to your mind that could be a target for Win?
Yeah, so Sabre Ventures, they are open to regionally or globally. But again, so my recommendation when approaching VCs, you want to have leverage in the negotiation. I would recommend not pursuing VCs to invest so you can build a prototype. If you're not coming with a prototype, if you're coming just with an idea and you want to conduct the research, most likely it would help pursuing scientific institutions or maybe government programs. I know, I think the US State Department, they do like global programs for, like they provide grants for people around the world. You have to speak to the embassies to be able to sort of get access to that. But my recommendation is don't pursue VCs with an idea to help you fund research. First, it puts you in a weak position because you all you have to show is an idea when VCs usually want to see some traction. So they want to see some progress or like growth in your startup. That's when you have the leverage, and then you have like better negotiation abilities within that conversation. And again, like most VCs, they're actually looking for established startups. You have to find specific VCs who might be going early stage or who would be willing to invest in the research stage.
Thank you so much for that answer. So if we move into the actually, since we said tech and we talked about changes, etc., there's a topic that it's one of the hot topics around the globe right now, since we are talking about food security, changing food habits, changing demand, etc. I wanted to actually show you a graphic, and I would love to have your thoughts on it. So so plant-based protein, it's one of the one of the major topics when we talk about the future of meat and future of protein. And in this graphic, with the support of Patent Effect, we worked on, as the you can see the trends within the plant-based protein. So as you can see, there's a huge rise from the 2016, and then sort of like a stable wave that we would say through the 2019. So the future of meat, the future of protein, plant-based alternatives, and all of these subjects are sort of like aiming the future of meat will become on this, and then we're not going to consume as much. But do you see this becoming the norm, just like the contactless delivery, just like the automation in agriculture and all of that? Do you see the plant-based protein will be happening all across the world, and do you see a potential demand on this in Kuwait as well? What's your thoughts on this?
So when it comes to plant-based, I think it's important to realize when it comes to business in general, it's important to pay attention to developments in cultural trends. So right now, there's a growing interest in environmentalism, and there's a growing interest in veganism, or ways of eating that don't harm the environment or don't harm other creatures like animals and such. So given the growing interest, given the growing cultural sort of that cultural attitude, I think there will be more interest in plant-based sort of offerings or technologies, because they're more sustainable, and many would consider sort of more humane. So there will be definitely growing interest in that space. How will the innovation take place? I honestly don't know. I don't have any sort of industry expertise when it comes to that.
My question is actually rather like, would you, as a consumer, like going to the market and picking these meat alternatives rather than the the regular produced meats, would you go for that? I'm really curious about, because one of the, I wanted to follow up on that. There was one of the questions in the webinars that we did in Thailand, was one of the questions was that how different do you see the future of food in the West and the East? And I remember a quote from the one of the executives from the Good Food Institute, which is generally working on the protein alternatives around the world. It said the meat is consumed with bones in Asia, but on the on the West you don't see that. So talking about like Impossible Burger.
Yes.
Exactly. So the culture of it, it's totally different, but it's also similar throughout the region. So do you see that going to the market and taking buying all these, I don't know, algae-based protein alternatives to home to cook with, or would you do it?
Okay, but so when it comes to cultural trends, there's usually a predominant culture, but there are also subcultures. So in Kuwait, we do have like vegan restaurants, and there's a growing interest in, even like for example, the protein shakes. People ask for plant-based proteins because of their personal beliefs, and so there will always be sort of subcultures that are interested in these things. And like what's interesting is that when you want to start a business, you will always find some kind of audience. It just depends on how big that audience is, and is that audience growing or shrinking. So again, like you just need to keep tabs on changing trends. Personally, I'm into sort of, I love meat. What change I would like to see is a better approach to the treatment of animals, not finding an alternative to meat. This is my personal sort of direction.
I see what you mean. Absolutely. I mean, this is one of the bets that we have with my business partner for the last, I think, like 4 or 5 years. Her bet is on the alternative protein. All of these products will not actually stick, especially in Turkey, in the MENA region, in the region, because it would be a niche rather than a norm. And my bet is on the other side. So I believe it will become quite an interest, not maybe with our generation, but our kids, and maybe the next generation, or even our brothers and sisters a generation. So this I
Yeah,
as a,
but I mean that's the thing. So uh, the like when it comes to building a business, it doesn't have to be mainstream. It can be
exactly.
like a niche, or it can be like a cult following, and you can have a really successful business, profitable and personally rewarding, but it doesn't cater for the mainstream. There's even this sort of business figure, I would say. His name is Pat Flynn. He has a website called Smart Passive Income. And one of the sort of advice that he gives is the riches are in the niches. Like going for a niche can actually be extremely profitable. And he gives lots of examples, like Lego enthusiasts, or like stamp collectors. It's not really mainstream, but it's profitable enough to focus on.
Absolutely, absolutely. That being said, I wanted to just move in to our last slide, since you said, we talked about, businesses adaptation, and you said, coming up with niche and all of that. So with the opportunities, section through all of this, global crisis around the world, we talked about contactless food, we talked about delivery, processed food as well. And the last bit I would love to, hear your thoughts on is the vertical farming, the urban farming, the interest on growing food anywhere and everywhere, being able to integrate all of these technologies, and also creating interest. Because the reason why this is also becoming quite interesting is that the fear of agriculture production by the producers itself, going out to fields because of the fears of pandemic, but it's also people are getting afraid of contracting the virus through fresh produce. So that's why the demand on fresh greens and herbs and all of that, etc., could suffer a blow. But also creating sort of like a mistrust for all of these produce by the consumers. So vertical farming coming to the picture with contactless agriculture, contactless production, minimal process, packaging, etc. So all of these facts are creating sort of like a, quote unquote safe environment for the agriculture production as well. So do you see any sort of like this sort of technologies could be a mainstream in Kuwait as well? Is there any interest within the startup? Has like any of them just caught your eye or interest? Or what's your thoughts on it? That's my general question, actually.
Okay, so one of my favorite TV shows is called Monk. It's about an OCD detective.
Yeah.
And there's like a phrase he usually repeats. It's a blessing and a curse. Okay, so his OCD, like it allows him to solve crimes very quickly, but there's also like the pain that comes with it. So with this sort of pandemic, I do see there is this curse element to it, but there's also this blessing element to it. And I feel, speaking from a personal point of view, there are many aspects, or many sort of industries, activities that I personally felt intimidated by, even though I have an interest in them, like cooking, for example. I would love to feel comfortable in the kitchen. Now, with the change in schedule or spending more time at home, most likely I will have more opportunity to cook things. Okay, so cooking is one thing. Gardening is another thing. There are so many activities that I believe we're going to open ourselves to them as new experiences, whether it's because we have more time and attention available, or because there's a pressing need to pursue them. when it comes to urban farming or vertical farms, I feel like people will open up more to them, out of concern and just out of entertainment, or like as a recreational activity, or maybe as like a stress management, because I know gardening is used a lot within, like in that context. So that's something like I do feel like there will be sort of opening up to that as an activity, and there's actually existing interest in these spaces in Kuwait. There's an account on Instagram called It All Grows, and it's about just helping people get started with gardening, and like knowing which sort of fruits, like which fruits to grow when, and so on.
Right.
And there's a company called, yeah,
Right.
there's a company called Biohydro, and they provide these sort of sets where you're able to grow, I think herbs or plants in general, but without soil, or like there's a system that you're able to grow plants at home. So maybe there's like the sort of the technology is there, the consumer adoption is gonna pick up with that.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that. So that actually covers all of our questions. So we talked about, you know, opportunities, challenges, trends, what's happening, and the new normal. And you know, we are adapting to the new normal as we speak. You know, doing this event on Zoom, and you know, ordering groceries outside, and you know, looking into food videos as you know more than we do, etc. And we are, you know, gearing up for the future of, you know, the startup ecosystem as well. Like, you know, depending on the products and services are changing, companies are adapting. So all of these, you know, interesting and sort of like a have to way, but it's also creating, you know, an in a sense that is, you know, shrinked timeline for the future as well, because you know we are looking into, we are now living the future that we've been talked about for about, I don't know, years to come, in 10 years. Now we are in it, so everything is in quite, you know, in you know, shifting gears in every day. So it's definitely interesting time.
There's actually, there's a joke about this, like who brought about the digital transformation in your organization? Was it the CEO, the CFO, the innovation manager, or COVID-19?
It's definitely the last one. Definitely.
Yeah.
I mean, it's definitely heartfelt. That joke is definitely heartfelt for a lot of companies.
Yes.
Haider, thank you so much for your time and you know, answering all these questions. I was gonna say, do you have any you know, any sign off that you wanted to, or call to action, any information that people, you know, can gather regarding your work and Sirdab Lab, etc.
You know, the thing is, I feel like I talk too much. I was really like, I wanted to ask you several questions and like know more about your experience working with startups and helping them innovate, because it's a real challenge. Like it can be extremely intimidating, whether going into a new industry, like somebody who's passionate about food but doesn't really have a presence in that industry, or people who are established but they have to sort of work against the norms within that space.
Right.
So I was curious to know, like, given your sort of experience and knowledge, given your experience working with startups, what do you feel has helped entrepreneurs become more innovative?
So if I take that question in a sense that directly from the startups and the sector that we are working on, if I may, I say this is also a great time for agri-food startups. I know it's an aggressive way of looking at it, but way I see it, I remember really, you know, vividly, 3 months ago, one of the, you know, the greatest players in the Turkish ecosystem, we, you know, bumped into each other in the metro, and we were just chatting about, you know, he was talking about what is being used to regarding the ecosystem, etc. And I remember that he was mentioning a startup that said, you know, agriculture is the, you know, work for the future, but we're not in that future yet. And I was like, And I was like, I mean, are you like, I mean, I understand that. I get that. And he was telling me like this, in 10 years, all of these stuff will be so important. And I can see that. I would love to, dive into that. But at the moment, I don't see any, interest, or rather that it's not today's job. And this was pre-pandemic. And 2.5 months later, now all I see is just talks on agriculture, food security, adaptations, processed food, how do we get food, etc. And food become the major topic of the conversation. I think this is a great opportunity for startups to gear up and just move forward, just tackling any of the challenges they have, because this time period maybe going to be maybe 2 months, 3 months, 5 months. It's not the best time to kick off a startup maybe, but it's definitely the time to move forward and just, undertake the challenges that they do. Because I believe when the shift happened in a proper way with the new normal, the food startups and agriculture, especially agriculture startups, will be there on top, I would say, with software, fintech, etc. I think it's going to be a golden age for those startups in the 2021, etc. I truly believe that, because in throughout the all of these our experience with the startups, with the organizations, with the governmental organizations, and everyone agreed with us regarding this. Like everybody I talked with, even in small conversations, formal, informal, everybody knew this is important regarding food and agriculture, but for the future, not for now. And then everything just changed, and now it's part of the greater conversation. So I do believe it's an interesting times to be an agri-food startup entrepreneur.
Okay, nice. So you asked me about the last words I would like to add. What you just mentioned inspired me to remember something. Peter Thiel, who's the author of 0 to 1, he has this sort of thought experiment that he does to help him overcome his own assumptions about what's possible. So what he says is, whatever plan you have for what you want to accomplish in the next 5 years, let's say, ask yourself, what stops me from achieving these goals within the next 6 months? Because at times when we say in the next 5 years, in the next 10 years, vision 2035, these kinds of things, technically we're just buying ourselves time. But if you set a constraint, and I would encourage all the attendees as well to think about this. If you have a goal, or you can think of it either as a goal that you want to reach, or the next 3 months within this time frame, what can you actually accomplish? And you can accomplish a lot within 3 months. You can write a book, you can at least start a business, that kind of thing. So rather than giving yourself long and extended periods of time and say someday, or it's not, the future is not now, think of what if it was possible to achieve that future in the next 3 months, in the next 6 months.
That's a great sign off. Absolutely. I 100% agree. Definitely, because this is the time of change for sure. And we are changing, the sector is changing, and we are moving directly into the future of, everything. Not just agri-food sector, but what work, what ecosystem, startup, finance, retail, everything. Great. Thank you so much, Haider. Thank you so much for your time, joining us today as the first webinar of the, Agri-Food Connect in Kuwait. I look forward to, continuing the next ones together. So thank you so much for all of the attendees joining us today. As I mentioned, we will be sharing a survey at the end of this webinar. Please feel free to share your feedback, your thoughts, anything regarding all of this, this session. And we will be, sharing, as we mentioned, all of the, survey and details you will see on the post email. So thank you so much for joining us today as well, and thank you so much, Haider, your time and your energy as well. It was a great time for sure. So
thank you very much. I really enjoyed it. Thank you for the invite. Take care.
Take care.